Welcome to Lawyerpreneur, where we discuss the alternate paths that allow lawyers to engage their entrepreneurialism and distinguish themselves from others, because being a lawyer doesn't have to mean doing business as usual. I'm your host, Jeremy Richter. Today's episode is brought to you by Alps Insurance, the nation's largest direct writer of lawyers' malpractice insurance. Founded for lawyers by lawyers over 30 years ago, Alps works directly with your firm, no broker or agent, and if you do have a claim, the Alps claims handling team is comprised of actual attorneys, all with private experience. Alps roots for the law firms they protect. They believe in your success and nurture your endeavors with industry-leading coverage, risk management resources, and accredited CLEs, offering practical advice for pioneering lawyers like you. And Alps has the slickest online application out there. Qualifying firms can apply, see rates, and bind coverage in about 20 minutes. Right now, you can get 25% off one CLE seminar from Alps. Go to alpsinsurance.com/CLE. That's ALPS insurance.com/CLE and use the promo code Lawyerpreneur upon checkout. In addition to the corporate sponsorship that helps pay for the hosting and transcription of the show, you can support Lawyerpreneur on Patreon at patreon.com/lawyerpreneur. For less than the cost of a 0.1, you can help pay for the time it takes in creating and editing Lawyerpreneur and receive copies of my two most recent books, Stop Putting Out Fires and Level Up Your Law Practice. Now, on to the interview. My guest today is Lisa M. Lilly, the best-selling author of suspense, thrillers, and supernatural novels, as well as nonfiction for writers. She's also a lawyer and adjunct professor at DePaul College of Law, and she hosts the Buffy and the Art of Story podcast. Lisa, welcome to Lawyerpreneur.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
I'm really glad to have you on the show. And when I first became aware of you, I was at a conference in Denver in September of last year when we used to still be able to go to conferences.
Yeah.
And I was walking around like downtown Denver listening to Joanna Penn's podcast, and you were the guest. And I just really enjoyed it. And I thought, I really want to have a conversation with Lisa at some point.
I'm so glad that you enjoyed that episode. It was really fun to record.
Yeah. And so when I did a deep dive on your blog to get ready for this interview, which is writingasasecondcareer.com, I went all the way back to the very first post in December of 2016. And you said some things in there that I think will really resonate. And they resonated with me. I think they'll resonate with the listeners too. And I want to ask you about some of that. And also, I think there was something in the air or in the water in 2016. That's when I started my blog. One of my lawyer friends, Josh Holt, who blogs as the Big Law Investor, started his then. And I know a handful of other people started in 2016. So I don't know what was happening that year, but there were a lot of blogs that started.
Yeah, we all wanted to blog. Now we all want a podcast, right?
Yeah, that's right. All right. So one of the things you said was, most of my living has been made as a lawyer, one who usually has more work than I want and struggles to carve out time to write and for a personal life. So at what point did you choose to prioritize the things that were personally important to you?
Yeah, I feel like that was a choice I had to keep making. But probably the first time I made a bit of a turn was I had been practicing about 3 years at a big law firm. And I felt established enough. I had clients who liked working with me. I had partners who were putting me on lots of cases. And I was at a firm that was somewhat open to flexible work arrangements. So I went in and said, hey, I also write novels and I really want to keep doing that. But it is hard to fit that in and bill, 2,100 hours a year. Is there a way of doing this where I could bill less and earn less? So they let me do it. I had to get sign off from all the partners I work with. Mixed reviews on how well that works. Often, and anyone who's done that will tell you often you end up working the same amount of hours and just getting paid less.
Yeah.
But it did open up some space. And then later on down the road was when I decided to open my own practice. And I had hit a point really difficult personal time. My parents were, it was a tragic accident. They were crashed. They were hit by a drunk driver and did not survive, although my dad did live for like 6 weeks. And everyone at the firm was amazing and clients were amazing. People were so very kind. But when it came time to kind of, go back to working full time, because I was still full time, even though it was a reduced schedule, it just hit me. I was on this case that was just so the worst case I have ever had in my practice in terms of stress. And I had to miss a 4th of July celebration that meant a lot to me. My dad was a veteran. He always marched in our parade where I grew up. And I so wanted to go back and be there with my cousins and see the other veterans and go to their party. And I just could not go. I mean, it was nobody's fault, but that was the nature of the case, of the practice, and it hit me. I thought, wait, this is not, every time these things happen, I say to myself, oh, it's an aberration. It won't be like this all the time. And I finally realized the aberration was when I did have time, when I could take a few weeks where I wasn't insanely stressed and I could spend a couple of hours writing and also maybe see one of my friends, or see my family. So I had been thinking already about what I wanted to do. Always in my mind was that I would like to have my own practice from before I started law school. So I finally sat down and kind of had a talk with myself and said, okay, like, how long am I going to keep saying, well, another couple of years at the big firm, I'll learn a little more. And so I spent a year planning and I started my own practice. And it was partly to have more control over my life, have more choice, so that if I got so busy, I was unhappy, I could actually make a choice to work less. And there would be no one to say to me, nope, sorry, that doesn't fit with our agenda.
Did that translate to reality for you when you made the leap?
It's a really good question. That's why I say it's been ongoing, because and of course I read this much too late. Later read something about how people who leave and start their own businesses because they want to do things differently typically recreate what they left. And I sort of did that, in a good way. Like, it was a good problem to have too much work. But I was prepared for everything but too much work. And, for the first few years, I was like, oh, this is great. I have all this work. Other solos I know are scrambling, for enough legal work to do. But yeah, there came a time, and it probably took longer than it should have for it to hit me, that I had put myself almost in the same spot where I was working many more hours than I wanted. I was actually writing more. At that point, I was publishing my own books too. So I was probably proportionately, I was spending a little more time writing. I did have a little more time for personal life. I had, a wider network of friends. I saw family more, but it was still really intense. So that was when I made the biggest turn. And I literally wrote the word no in magic marker on a Post-it and put it over my phone, so that if someone called and said, hey, I want to refer you this case, I would say no, because my default was to say yes, and then just work more and more and more and more.
Well, yeah, because we're lawyers and we're risk averse.
Yes.
And we have this, well, I won't project this on you, but I have this mindset that I try to stay away from, that I can't say no to this case because what if there aren't any more cases after it? So saying no seems impossible.
Yeah, that is exactly it. No matter how I'm sure probably all lawyers identify, no matter how busy you are, you can be simultaneously overwhelmed because you're so busy and worried, yes, that 3 months from now or 6 months from now, you'll have nothing. And I really, that's saying no was really hard. And so I did it gradually. I first started saying no to, I would accept anything from current clients, but nothing, because I was fortunate that the area I did had a lot of ongoing repeat business. But I would say no to anybody new. I'd just say, you know what, I'm fully engaged. I'm not taking any new clients. And then I started saying, no to current clients if it wasn't exactly in my area. And then eventually, maybe 2 years later, I actually made the decision to just wind up what I had and focus on writing as my primary activity. And by that time I was adjunct teaching too, because I couldn't just do one thing.
Yeah.
So but that was probably a 3-year process of making that shift.
Well, and that leads me to where I wanted to go next. Of you're a writer, you write fiction and nonfiction. You're an adjunct law professor, a podcaster. Does having those multiple endeavors provide you with more fulfillment or a better balance than if you were just spending all of your energy on one pursuit?
For me, it does. It does mean it is still a challenge sometimes to remember that I should leave a little time for just fun, fun that is not work related in any way. Because for a lot of years, my fun was to write my novels. I would go on vacation and it would be a writing retreat to just write and interact with other writers and learn. And that was great. But that is kind of the danger of multiple things to do. But I do prefer that because I like interacting and meeting different people. Teaching allows me to do that. When now the small amount of law I practice, I'm of counsel for another firm and I work remotely with them, even when it's not COVID times, we work remotely. So I really like having that mix of, I teach and these are people starting out and they're excited about law and they're excited about everything. And then some amount of law where I use those legal skills and occasionally go into court and write briefs. And then a lot of time writing fiction. It all kind of engages different parts of what I like to do and where I think my skills are. And then I just added the podcasting, which has been a big learning experience and has been fun. And that goes to that. I'm not in court that much anymore. And I do enjoy that sort of presenting and speaking. So yeah, I do like having that mix. It makes it more challenging to schedule my life and really focus on what project, make sure that I get things done and get things out and don't just dabble in everything. But it does help me feel happier. And ironically, I guess for some people, like it's less stressful that way to me to be able to shift and not just have one thing that everything is riding on, or it's all that I do.
So as you transitioned toward the second career of writing being your primary source of income and primary place of spending your time, were there parts of being a lawyer that were helpful, or was your experience as a lawyer and your skills that you had, was there any of that held you back? How did that translate to the new business?
Yeah, I think there was both. It's certainly a lot of skills as a lawyer. My practice was very writing intensive. So it's a different kind of writing, but the idea of deadlines, you have to turn things out. So it was very natural to me to say, okay, I want to finish my first draft in a month. This is how many words I have to write a day. And as a lawyer, most of us, if we bill by the hour, which for the most part I did, we're very used to really knowing where we're spending our time. So I was used to
every 6 minutes of it.
Every 6 minutes, yeah. Can I bill someone for reading this magazine? But yeah, and I think there's a real plus there because it makes you conscious of how much you can get done in a short time, and also of really choosing. I have friends who say, how can you go on Facebook and not just get down a rabbit hole? And I thought, well, yeah, it's from years of billing 8.5 hours a day, plus doing firm committees, plus writing my novel. You don't do that and go down the Facebook rabbit hole, because then you either don't sleep, or so I think it helps make you more focused. But the thing that probably held me back was shifting from the time model to the project model. While of course I always had projects, I had deadlines, thinking of how productive I was based on time was something I feel like I have had to struggle to shift away from, because I would schedule in X amount of hours to work on my novel. But it took me a lot of years to seriously say, no, I need to get X amount of pages done if I want to publish by this state. I would often move. I was great at first drafts, but after that, the revising process, I would just be like, well, it'll take however long it takes, because I didn't want to push myself the way I had in my law practice and get burnt out. But I realized I was thinking too much about, well, I spent 3 hours a day revising, so check, did that, rather than, yeah, but I only revised 2 scenes. I needed to move on. I needed to say, no, I'm going to revise X amount of pages. I was really too giving myself a mental gold star for the time versus did I get this revision finished? So that has been a challenge. It was something I didn't even realize I was doing. I forget whose podcast I listened to who talked about that with productivity, and it finally hit home. I thought, okay, yes, stop thinking about hours spent. That really is irrelevant, other than I'd like to spend less so I have more time to do other things.
Were there any, practical things that you implemented to help you make that transition?
Yeah, I had always done a sort of scheduling for myself, but I had not really sat down and broken down the process of, well, not how long does it take me to revise, but if I'm going to publish, let me go backwards from the publication date and figure out by when do I have to have this done, and then break down those stages and really allocate specific times for that. And I have to be flexible, because if something, it's a busy week teaching, or a student really needs help or something like that, yeah, I can still move some deadlines around. But it helped me a lot to both put a time frame on when I would get something done, and to really think about why I was doing a project. Was that the most important project to me right then? And what was my end goal with it? Is it to have another book in the series? Is it because I've got a podcast episode coming out about it? Is it, really think about what is the point of doing this? And that kind of pushed me to really look closely at how much time I spent and be more efficient with my time.
So I think in the last 4 months or so, all of us have had to discover how flexible we are or not.
Yeah.
I imagine that was probably true with you. I expect you had to figure out how to teach a course virtually mid-semester last year.
Yeah, it was our last 4 weeks. We shifted online and had adjunct professors don't get a ton of resources or training or anything. Although my sort of team leader is really great and very helpful. So part of it was, since I had started the podcast, I did those last 4 classes by audio. I would record audio sections, put them up for the students to listen to, and then we would do an online, just typing in stuff for them, because I had never used Zoom at that point. And it seemed like we were just talking about, before we started, there's only so many things, you can learn and do and fit in. So I just said, this is what I can do. And the students told me that they liked it, because everyone else was doing Zoom. It was kind of an overloaded platform at the moment. And they enjoyed the switch where they could listen to the audio and they felt it was a little more relaxed, and then they could go and comment and we'd have this discussion. Now, the coming semester, I think I'm going to have to get more proficient with running a group on Zoom, because I don't see doing a whole semester that way.
Yeah. So in 2011, you gave an interview that I'm not going to ask you to remember, because that was 9 years ago. But I want to quote yourself to you and then ask you some questions, because I liked what you said there. All right. So you said, you were talking about the decision to start your own firm. And I think there are a lot of lawyers out there who will have a spark of recognition when they hear this. So you said, I opened my own law firm because I decided, rather than working so hard for the large firm I practiced at and pitching myself to the partners to convince them to promote me, I ought to work hard for myself and pitch directly to my clients. I've been very happy with that decision. I like being my own boss, and I'm better able to balance my writing and law practice. How is that control, which I can totally identify with, and flexibility of being your own boss benefited everything else?
It gives it gives me more choice in what I do, and I'm happier with that. So even now, if there's a law project that's really interesting to me, I can spend the time on it. When it came to writing, that really influenced my decision to publish my work myself and form my own small press, because I went through the same thought process as well. I really liked running my own practice and going kind of directly, going to the clients directly. I mean, I already had relationships, but being able to work directly with them and shape my practice. And I thought of writing that way too, of being able to put my work directly out there to readers rather than going through gatekeepers and letting someone else tell me what I could publish and what I couldn't, and what I should be writing and how fast and when. So I feel like having started my own practice really gave me the confidence to do that. And it showed me that I do like running a business. There, you wear a lot of hats with it, which can be frustrating sometimes, but I also like it. I like to look at the books and see where I am. I like to look down the road and know what's going on rather than being surprised when my boss tells me.
But, and I can identify with that. My first book I published through the American Bar Association, and they had control, and it was a good relationship. Everything went fine, but they had ultimate control over the title, over the cover, the content, the pricing. And after going through that process, I realized, like, that was fine, but I want to have control over these things. I want to manage them. I'm willing to put in the time and the energy and the effort to build up the knowledge base to be able to do this on my own. And so I can really identify with what you're saying there of writing is interesting and good, but also running your own business and being the one who realizes the profits from that and putting in the work is just really fulfilling.
When I think most writers, and before I decided, I talked with a number of different, I didn't know anyone who self-published, but I knew authors who were published traditionally, and I talked with them, and they would talk about those frustrations. Like you said, they didn't have control over the cover, or they had to do pretty much all the marketing and publicity themselves, unless you were with a giant press who really threw a lot behind you. But most authors I had met were with smaller presses, so there was a limited amount that the publisher did for them. And they said, yeah, we are doing all the legwork and we're happy to do that, but we're limited in our tools. I put my Awakening series right now, the first book is free on the ebook edition, and that drives a lot of sales to the rest of the series. I've seen the difference when I have it free versus when I charge for it, and I make more when it's free, which is counterintuitive if you're from the traditional publishing model. But I know authors who say, yeah, I wish I could do that. But I can't. They can't even see what their sales are from not even month to month, let alone, day to day, to see if a particular thing they did increase their sales. So they're really flying blind on whether their marketing efforts, are they making a difference? Where when you can see everything and control everything, you can see and decide, oh, that thing wasn't worth doing, or that ad wasn't worth running, and this one was.
So I've done interviews for the podcast with Robert Dugoni, who writes thrillers, and with Brian Cuban, who's a speaker and a writer. And so they both have their own businesses, and they've both said that if you want to be successful in your business pursuits outside of a law practice, you have to put in the same hard work and determination that you put into your law career. What does that look like for you as a daily practice in your writing?
For me, that means I do. It starts on a bigger picture, much like I did with my law practice. Every quarter, I would try to sit down and say, okay, what are my goals this quarter? I would do it for the year, but I would look at it quarterly and then compare that to what I was doing day to day. And I do the same thing with my writing. I have quarterly goals. So when I sit down and plan my week, I take out that list and say, okay, where am I on that list? and what do I need to do this week that will move me toward those goals. And it took me a while to realize, to run it as a business, to their point, which I think is a good one, that I needed to do it that way. I was always good at getting the words written, but a lot of the time everything else was sort of like throwing spaghetti at the wall and just kind of, well, I'll try this, I'll try that, I'll try that. And when I really started looking at it more significantly as this is my main business, that was the biggest difference. I really would look at, okay, what goal am I trying to advance by doing this? Is this a priority goal? Or is this a maybe sometime I'd like to do that? And if so, let me do the priority ones first and do the things that I think will have the most effect. And I have to enjoy them too, obviously, but it really helped to start thinking of it that way, the same way I had with my practice.
I like that. All right, we've talked about your podcast, or we've mentioned your podcast a couple times. You've turned the first season of the podcast into a book, which I think is really interesting because this podcast was a book idea long before it was a podcast idea. I wanted to write about lawyers who were doing interesting, innovative things, whether it was within their own practices or outside of law practice, altogether. And then there's a whole spectrum in the middle. And so I knew that was going to require interviewing a lot of people. And as an introvert, that's not something that I'm just super inclined to just reach out to people. So having the podcast and having deadlines was a way to force myself into that. But did you find it easy to transition all the words that you were generating through the podcast into a book that was able to help you, tell that narrative and communicate that information?
It was harder than I thought it would be, but it was probably an easier process than writing, sort of starting from zero. And the book idea came about almost by accident. I put something up on my Facebook page saying, hey, my podcast started, Buffy and the Art of Story. And one of my friends from law school, who's a huge Buffy fan, wrote, oh, I can't wait to buy that book, because he just assumed it was a book because he knew I was a writer. And I thought, oh, that's a good idea. So what I did was I used Dragon, Naturally Speaking, to dictate, sometimes to write, and you can also transcribe recordings. So the transcripts come from that, but they need a lot of editing, more than I thought it would take. And in some ways, it is a little tedious because you've already, it isn't the same like exciting creation process. But it was interesting doing it. And I feel like I learned a lot by putting that first season into the book. I learned a lot that also helped me as I went forward with the next season of the podcast. And now that I'm working on that one into a book, I can see that, I made some good changes based on that. I did have to edit more than I thought, because it's like a deposition transcript, right? You see your words on paper and you say, that was not very articulate.
No, there was one time, I look at most of my deposition transcripts, sometimes, just flinching the whole time. And there was one court reporter who I think she must have hated me because she every time I said okay, which I think was at the beginning of almost every question, she put in there. Because most of them will take that out, especially if it's people you know really well, but she did not. She included all of them, and I counted. It was a lot. And you're just like, oof, I have to fix that. But
yeah, it's good. It's good feedback in a way. But yes, I did have a court reporter friend who confirmed what you just said. She said, well, if I really like the lawyer, I'll edit out the ums and uhs. And she's like, but if I don't, I'll just leave them all in.
Yep. Well, and then, so I transcribe, or I don't transcribe all these. I have a bot AI bot that transcribes all the podcasts. But then I have to edit it, just like you talked about with the Dragon software. And it takes, like 2 hours for every 45 minutes of editing and, just like making it tidier. And I wouldn't have anticipated that, but it's also, like you said, it's the same experience, and realizing I say like too much and and right, and you're like, okay, and we'll see, I just did it, and now I'm really cognizant of it, of trying to think and improve. And so, these processes that we're doing for things like for me that are unrelated to my law practice particularly are still have an effect on my law practice, because it's hopefully improving my oratory skills or my presentation skills and communications with clients or whoever. When you were doing both of these things simultaneously, did you see that relationship where improvement in your writing area also translated to improvements and changes in your practice?
Yeah, I definitely found that both endeavors complement each other. And the writing, I wrote fiction before I ever thought about going to law school. And on that note, I had clients. So even as a new lawyer, I was very comfortable writing, and I had clients who would find out that I wrote fiction and say, oh, that makes so much sense, because, maybe it was yours was the first brief that I didn't have to edit. Or they would say, you have a much more, not quite conversational style, because a lot of my writing was like appellate writing, but more easier to read. They would say, oh, it's so much easier to read. It's so much more engaging. And most of my stuff was insurance related class actions. So if you can make that engaging to read, that is a real challenge and very technical. So it was nice to know that they would quite often say, oh yeah, of course you are, that's great. But like you said, other things too, the presentation, the fact that I had read my words in depositions and worked deliberately on not doing the likes and as much. We all do it, but I think that then helped me when I taught, presenting at court, helped me. I too am more of an introvert, despite that I really like presenting and getting up on stage. When I go to a writer's conference, for instance, my instinct is just to sit back there with my notepad and not talk to anybody. And I would really have to draw on my legal training and think, okay, it's just like at court. You need to go up and introduce yourself, go say hello, go say, hey, we have emailed, I'm so-and-so. And it helped to I had to kind of reframe it, because I really did feel more confident in the legal arena for quite a long time. And so kind of borrowing from that was very helpful to me.
Well, I think it's funny that you mentioned writing style and voice, because, my writing style for my blog and my books is very conversational. Somebody even called it irreverent, which I'm not sure what that means, but I chose to take it as a compliment.
I think so.
But I see that when I'm writing like briefs or memos to clients of like, this is far less overwritten than it might have been a few years ago. And it sounds more like me, as I've spent, hundreds of thousands of words figuring out how I write and how I communicate.
Yeah, I think there is, when we're new lawyers, especially, there's that struggle to master the sort of the form of legal writing and the map that you should follow and which words to use. And it takes a while to have that style of your own that works and yet is unique. And I feel like the more you write, even if it's totally unrelated things, the more you are developing that style. I have had to be careful. Sometimes the legal side creeps into the fiction and I have to edit it out. I had a line of dialogue, it was years and years ago, but my writer's group, I had a character said something like, arguably, blah, 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 blah. And the character was not a lawyer. And my writer's group said, okay, nobody says that. I'm like, what do you mean? Everyone I know says that. They're like, yeah, nobody says that.
I understand. In an interview you did several years ago, well, let me preface this. One of the things I wrote about in my most recent book was about fear of failure and coping with that. And so in an interview you gave a few years ago, you said that sometimes you fear that what you write won't be any good. And so with a decade of writing and dozens of books under your belt. Is that a fear that you still experience? And if so, how do you cope with that?
There is always a stage in the process of whatever I'm writing where I have that feeling and that fear. It isn't as often or as strong as it used to be, but there's always that point, and it could be in the first draft where I just don't know. I thought I knew where I was going and I don't. Or I'm reading back my first draft and in fact, I'm doing that right now. I'm reading one and I hit this part and I'm like, oh, this is deadly dull. Like there's nothing happening here. I thought this was so exciting when I wrote it. And there is that fear that I won't be able to figure out how to fix this, that the whole idea just isn't working. And I have spent 3 months writing it on and off. But the way I deal with it, and I feel like this helps the more you do it, is to say, okay, I remember I have felt this way before and I figured it out. I will figure it out. And the other way is having a greater sense of that it is okay if it takes another draft, but it's also okay if I finish it and I think it's great. There's going to be some readers who don't. There'll be some who love it, and there'll be some who say, this book is not for me. And that's all right, because maybe one of my other books will be for them, or maybe the next book will be for them, as long as I can get it to where I think it's the best it can be. But I feel like the bigger thing is just accepting that at some stage of the process, it probably isn't very good. But that's what revising is for. And I'm more comfortable with that. In that process, I will figure out a way to make it better.
I was listening to a podcast this morning where the writer said he quit his day job. He had a young family with no real savings, but just like confidence that he was going to be able to work it out. Your transition to writing as your primary career was not so abrupt. Mm-hmm. You had a transition time. Did having the career in your law practice and having that transition over a couple of years put less pressure on you to have the writing be immediately financially successful and a significant source of income? And was that helpful to that, as you transitioned?
It definitely was helpful. And there are pluses and minuses to that. The minus is when I chose what to write, I wasn't always focused on what would make sense, in terms of the market or financially.
Sure.
If I had been, I had that supernatural thriller series. I still get new readers in it now, even though I published the first book in it in 2011. The thing to do really, if I just wanted to focus on the market and what makes sense financially, would have been to do another supernatural thriller series, not switch over to female private eye novels. Because I thought more readers might carry over, but for the most part, there's a little crossover in that audience, but not a lot, because some people just never read supernatural. Some people don't want to read just plain mysteries. But the plus is, I've been able to write things I love to write. And I do think about the market. I do think about business, but in the long run, my thought is always, well, if I'm not going to write what I love to write, I can just go and do more law, because I like that writing too. And that's a for sure payment. That's a pretty sure I will make more at that, at least in the short run, right? Sure. It's a short term, generally speaking, the clients pay.
Right. You're immediately trading your time for money.
But then that's the thing, you're trading your time for money and you never get out of that. But really, if I were just going to choose what I wrote based totally on the market and was going to try to write something I wasn't that engaged with anymore, I would rather do law. I like law. I enjoy it. So law has given me that freedom to say, okay, there is a universe of things I like to write. And sure, of the ones I like to write, I'll try to look at the market and look at business, but I don't have to go to the extreme with that. If I really love, and my new series, I'm on the 4th book now and it's only starting to kind of take hold, but I could do that because I could think long-term and think, yes, but that's what I really want to be doing right now. And that meant more to me. And I feel really fortunate, that I had a career really two careers I enjoy, and I've been able to balance them out and decide to some extent, like veer towards what I really enjoy doing. It's a long process getting here, but
Yeah, it's only taken like 10 years, right?
Yeah, but I liked a lot on the way too. There were great things, and continue to be practicing law, and also lots of great life experience too while doing it.
Well, we're about out of time, but I want people to know where they can find you and follow you and read your work.
So you can find all my books at lisalilly.com, and that's Lilly is Lilly. And my articles on writing and marketing and business for authors are at writingasasecondcareer.com. And my podcast, Buffy and the Art of the Story, you would find that on lisalilly.com also, or Twitter at Lisa M. Lilly.
All right. Thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. It was great talking with you.
Thanks for listening, and I hope you've enjoyed today's show. Please take time to rate and subscribe at whatever podcatcher you're listening on. And if you want more from me, you can find me at jeremywrichter.com. You can also find me on Twitter at RichterJW. And if you want the extra audio and benefits available at Patreon, you can become a patron at patreon.com/lawyerpreneur. Thanks for listening.